and go to our fetch script, and we're going to need to add an option. So we just simply copy and paste the last conditional statement for Unix, and change the row value from 2 to 1 more, which would be 3. And we're going to return the row OS is going to be Windows space remote. And the label is going to be Windows with a capital W space remote with a capital R. And we can save, and we can preview. And under the preview results, we see we have Windows Remote now as an option. It's exactly what we want. Okay. So if we go ahead and we can test this without running the report, but we can test this by the report selection in OS type, we need to, again, there's a bug. Once you make a change in the data set that a parameter depends on, we need to click the edit button, and if you see it right now, it still says OS here, right? And you don't see our OS label option as we had said before. So we need to click off of it, like I said, click back on it. Don't ask me why. Now we see OS label as a value for our display text. So we're good on that. And we need to do the same for, while we're here, we'll do the same for the resources that we copied over. We'll have to do that later again, so we can just leave it alone. So, and we can preview here, make sure we do have Windows Remote as an option. So everything's good so far, but it's not going to let us continue till we fix this resources one. So we'll click off of it, click on it, and select resource label as the display text. Okay, and now we can save. So now that allows us to select Windows Remote, but how do we get the different servers names as a parameter option, right? If we just ran this report right now, and I'll show you by clicking the preview button, we can now select Windows Remote, right? Well, we're still getting ITM as the server name here, right? Granted, it's not the right ITM though, and that's because we didn't set how to select the different queries for the different data, the different OS types that you select. And where we do this is in the resources. If we open up, remember by default it's going to do, if we look at this query, it's going to pull from the NT system DV table. It's going to pull all the server names there. Well, we need to edit it, so we can go to our script tab, and our before open script has the ones for Linux and Unix. So this is where the magic happens if you select a different OS type. So we can just copy and paste the conditional statement for Unix like we did previously. So it says if OS type value is, now we're going to call it Windows Remote, the lowercase one is the value. We're going to change the query to select, we're going to select our server names and from the right tables. Now how do we know what column name to use and what table name to use for our Windows Remote agent? Well, that's easy. We go to the tabs, and we can minimize this guy, and we can go to our historical configuration. And if we note here that we see our different agents here. So we want to go to Agentless Windows OS, and we see here different historical configurations. So if we were to select over just the top of it, we can see all these names begin with KR2 as the group names. So we know that it's safely assumed the agent code begins with KR2 and that all the different tables in the databases begin with KR2. Okay, that's great. How do we know which table we're going to need the data from? Well, this is a CPU report, so we're going to want to pull from either processor or system because that's where our CPU data is. So in this case, we look at the processor one, and we can see it's KR2 processor is the name of the attribute. So we can safely assume it's going to be called KR2 underscore processor in the database. But how do we know what column to key off of as our server name? Well, that's easy. We go into the query editor, and we can go to WMI systems, which is the type of remote OS agent I'm using, and we can go again under our processor table. And if we look at these, we see the different columns it returns. Well, node is one that it returns, which is essentially the server name that we need to key off of. So that is the column name we need. So I'll go here, and we know now it's called node is the attribute name. And we know that the database is going to be, instead of systemdb, it's going to be kr2_processor, and we're going to leave it the daily view. That should be there. Now, if you want to verify this, we're going to do in a minute. The way you would go about doing this, we're going to save this first. The way you go about doing this is simply double-clicking on the data source, and in here we maximize this, we have essentially a browser, and we can browse our database. Now, if we look under our ITM user schema, which all our data resides in, we don't see all the tables known to man because by default, BERT only pulls the first 100 tables for a schema. So we're going to need to apply filters, which we can do here. ITM user. And we see KR2 starting here, right? So if we want to make sure we got the right table, we can just put filter KR2 because we know that's the beginning of the agent code. So we click apply filter, and now it should show us up to 100 tables of KR2. So we can go to our processor table, and we should have a DV processor table, which we see here. And we can do we know the name is processor. We can only show views if we want to, because we're looking at a view. So we'll only show KR2, all the views. So we go to processor, and we see our DV here. And if we expand that, we see all of the columns that it returns, just as we saw in the tabs. Our we see here the node name, and that's what we're keying off of for our listing of servers, which is good. So we can go ahead and we verify that that's the right table name, and we have it here, everything's set. And if we go ahead and double click on this and try and do preview results, you're only going to still see the ITM the Windows resources, and that's because the default query is for Windows only. Now you can just change this default query to verify that query for the Windows remote works, but what I recommend doing instead is going to the parameter selection and testing it there. So here we can select an OS type value, which we have to select first. We're going to select Windows Remote. And then we're going to go to the server name and select value here and make sure it's pulling correctly. And we see R2:ITM:WMI. It's pulling the remote Windows WMI agent server name out of the table successfully. Now, as we said before, we want to see some different value. We only want to see ITM. We've already taken care of that. We've already gotten rid of everything before the first colon and everything after the last colon. So if we go ahead, alright, and we go ahead and do the preview again and look at the parameters, it should be fine. So we will select Windows Remote, and it's capitalized as we expect. And the server name is ITM. It's pulling successfully. So far we are good to go. So now we need to create a data set for pulling the data from that processor table for the Windows Remote agent. So what I recommend doing is copying the existing Windows data set, and again this data set, and paste them. Sometimes you get these little errors inside of BERT where you need to close out. The best thing to do is close out the report and open it up again. Now that we've copied it, we can rename him. We're going to call him CPU Windows Remote. So now if we double click on him to edit him and look at the query,